Hello, my name is Derek Atkins, and this video lecture is entitled Outreach to the Barbarians Part 2. This video lecture is for the class Church History 1 at the East Asia School of Theology. So in Part 1, we looked at the question, how did Christians begin the task of reaching out to the barbarians of Northern and Western Europe with the gospel during the Dark Ages. That is, during the 5 centuries or so that followed the end of the Roman Empire. And we looked at some different strategies that were key to reaching the barbarians with the gospel. So in this second part of this lecture, we're going to look at how barbarians in the British Isles and in Germany were reached with the gospel. So let's begin by looking at the growth of Christianity in the British Isles. Now, we do not know the exact date when Christianity first entered the British Isles, but we do know that the first Christians to enter the British Isles did so during the Roman Empire. Rome abandoned Britain in AD 409, never to return. Following the departure of the Romans, Britain was invaded by some barbarians. Basically, they were invaded by the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jews. These invaders drove the surviving Christians in Britain back into Wales, Scotland, and Ireland. So Britain was still in need of the gospel. And so the first missionary I want to talk about is St. Patrick. St. Patrick is not the first missionary to go to Ireland, but he is certainly the most famous, and he is celebrated today as Ireland's patron saint. Now, we do not know when Patrick was born, but it was likely that he was born in the late 300s, shortly before the departure of the Roman legions. His father was a Roman official and a church deacon, while his grandfather was a priest in the Celtic church. Now, at this time, Celtic priests were often married. So that's why his grandfather was a priest. Despite growing up in a Christian family, Patrick later wrote that he did not know the true God while he was young. When he was 16 years old, Patrick was captured by a raiding party of Irish pirates and was taken across the Irish Sea to Ireland, where he was sold into captivity. For about 6 years, he served his master as a shepherd. It was during these years that Patrick turned to faith in God and began to spend time in intense and persistent prayer. Later, he sensed God leading him to escape, and he actually had a vision about escaping Ireland. And so, after walking some 200 miles across Ireland, he reached the shore where he found a boat. He joined the crew of the boat and sailed back to Britain. Sometime after his return to Britain, Patrick had a second vision, this one of an Irish man begging him to return to Ireland. This was Patrick's Macedonian call, and over the objections of his family, Patrick left Britain for Gaul, where he spent about 15 years of study in a monastery. And during these 15 years, he was preparing for his mission to go to Ireland. Finally, after 15 years of preparation, Patrick returned to Ireland. Although Patrick was not the first Christian missionary to go to Ireland, most Irish were still deeply rooted in paganism, worshiping the sun, the moon, wind, water, fire, and rocks. They also believed in good and evil spirits. And in fact, the holiday of Halloween is rooted in ancient Irish beliefs about the spirits of the dead visiting the land of the living on the night of Halloween. The Irish at that time also practiced human sacrifice, and the Druids enjoyed a high status. The Druids led pagan worship rituals, and so this is the society that Patrick went to in Ireland at that time. Patrick encountered strong opposition from these Druids and faced great dangers, including being kidnapped and held captive for 2 weeks. But he remained faithful in his mission and eventually began winning some of the powerful Druids to Christianity. One tremendous advantage that Patrick had was his ability to communicate in the old Irish language used in Ireland at that time. He also had a very keen understanding of Irish culture, including local traditions, superstitions, and customs, as well as the key roles that Druids and kings played. Patrick's linguistic skills and cultural understanding came from the years that he spent as a slave in Ireland before his escape. So we see that God was able to use Patrick's years as a slave to prepare him to be a missionary to the Irish people. In addition, Patrick had a deep love for the Irish people, despite the fact that they had enslaved him for 6 years. And so this is remarkable because it shows that he was willing to forgive his captors. Shortly after his arrival, Patrick convinced King Loeger to grant religious toleration to Christians. The king's brother became a believer and gave Patrick land on which to build a church. Patrick labored in Ireland for more than 30 years, and by the time he died, most of Ireland had been evangelized. Let's look at St. Columba. St. Patrick's legacy lived on through the work of later generations of Irish missionaries, including the monk Columba. Columba was born in AD 521 to a Christian family and entered a monastery as a young man. He is credited with founding many churches and monasteries in Ireland, and he was active in evangelistic work throughout Ireland. In AD 563, Columbus left for the, quote, foreign mission field of Scotland, and together with 12 other monks, founded a church and established a monastic community on the island of Iona, just off the coast of Scotland. After establishing this monastic community on Iona, Columba began doing missionary work on the Scottish mainland itself, serving among the Picts. Through Columba's witness, King Brude of the northern Picts converted to Christianity. Following King Brude's conversion, Columba was given the right to send missionaries all over northern Scotland. Although other Christian missionaries labored in Scotland, Columba is given much of the credit for helping to evangelize Scotland. Now, let's talk a little bit about Pope Gregory the Great. Pope Gregory the Great, AD 590 to 604, these were the years of his papacy, played an important role in the evangelization of the British Isles. Before he became Pope, he once saw English slaves at a slave market in Rome. And on this occasion, he was very impressed with their pale skin and their golden hair. And upon asking where they were from, he was told that they were Angles. It is said that Gregory said that these people who called themselves Angles looked more like angels. Now, we don't know if this quote is true or not, but what we do know is that once he became Pope, Gregory the Great took great interest in missionary outreach to the British Isles. In many ways, this was remarkable because during his pontificate, Gregory the Great dealt with threats to Rome from both the barbarian Lombards to the north and the Byzantines to the east. In addition, the city of Rome had declined from a population of more than 1 million people during the height of the Roman Empire to fewer than 50,000 people in Gregory's day. One reason for Gregory's great interest in missionary outreach may also have come from his past years spent as a monk, having established a monastery of his own on his own property. One of the people whom Gregory the Great sent to England as a missionary was a man named Augustine, who later became known as Augustine of Canterbury. So Augustine was sent by Pope Gregory to Britain in AD 596, together with 40 monks and a library of sacred literature. Augustine's mission was to evangelize the Anglo-Saxons of Britain. One of the issues Augustine had to deal with was the question of what to do about pagan traditions. And so Augustine sought advice from Pope Gregory the Great. And Gregory the Great responded to St. Augustine's request for advice, and he gave Augustine some advice. He told Augustine not to destroy the pagan temple. Instead, Augustine should only destroy the pagan idols that were inside the pagan temples. He also advised Augustine to replace pagan animal sacrifices with Christian festivals. And for example, this is exactly what happened with the holiday of Halloween, because the name for Halloween, the Celtic name for Halloween was originally Samhain. And so that was celebrated on October 31st. And it was believed that on that night, the barrier between the veil or wall between this world and the world of the dead was at its thinnest. And so on that night, the spirits of the dead would walk on earth. And this is why people would put lanterns in their windows. They would dress as other people because they were afraid of these dead spirits. And they were doing these things to try to protect themselves against these spirits from the dead who were wandering in the world that night. Now, when Christianity arrived in Scotland, what Christians did was they Christianized this holiday. And so what they did was they designated November the 1st as All Saints' Day. The old name for All Saints' Day is All Hallows' Day, which means the night before All Hallows' Day was known as All Hallows' Eve, which later became Halloween. And so that's part of the history behind the holiday of Halloween. We call it Halloween because Christians tried to Christianize this holiday by shifting focus to the celebration of All Saints' Day on November the 1st. Now, back to St. Augustine. Amazingly, God opened the door to the evangelization of Anglo-Saxon Britain through the arrival of a Christian princess. Ethelbert, the King of Kent in southeastern England, married a Christian princess from Paris named Bertha. Bertha was permitted to bring a Gallic bishop with her. This helped open the way for Ethelbert's own conversion in AD 597, and at the first Christian festival following his conversion, King Ethelbert and 10,000 of his subjects were baptized. As a result of the conversion of Ethelbert, Augustine was appointed by Pope Gregory the Great as the first Archbishop of Canterbury. And so the Archbishop of Canterbury, today's Archbishop of Canterbury, can trace his lineage, his ecclesiastical lineage, all the way back to St. Augustine of Canterbury. Now, let's talk about the conversion of barbarians in Germany. Christianity first appeared in Germany by about AD 300 in Western Germany, which was then part of the Roman Empire. At that time, Christians in present-day Germany were few in number. One of the great Christian missionaries to Germany is Boniface, also known as the Apostle to Germany. Boniface was born into a prosperous and respected family sometime around AD 675 in Devonshire, England. He became a Benedictine monk at an early age over the objections of his family. Boniface had a strong missionary calling from God and set out as a missionary to the Frisians of Friesland, located on the northern coast of Western Germany. Unfortunately, Friesland was being fought over by a couple of kings at that time, so Boniface's first mission to Friesland failed. Boniface then returned to England, and upon returning to England, he learned that the abbot of his monastery had died. The monks there offered Boniface the office of abbot, but Boniface turned down this offer because he had a strong missionary calling from God. In 718, Boniface decided to go back to missionary work, but first he went to Rome, where he received papal approval for his missionary efforts. At that time, Arianism was popular in Germany. So, in addition to fighting against pagan religious beliefs and practices, Boniface also stood against the Arian heresy. Boniface focused his evangelistic efforts on the upper classes with the idea that if he could win the upper classes first, the lower classes would follow. Boniface did take seriously the beliefs of the German people, and he tried to communicate the gospel in ways that they could understand. And so his approach to mission is an example of contextualizing the gospel to make the gospel more understandable to the people who are being reached. Now, the most famous event in Boniface's ministry took place when he took an axe and chopped down Geismar, the tree of the thunder god. In other words, the tree of Thor. This tree was sacred, and when Boniface began chopping it down, many people thought that the thunder god 4 would strike him dead. So as he was chopping, these people were just gathered around him, expecting him to be struck dead by Thor at any moment. Boniface survived, however, proving that the thunder god, Thor, was not a real god at all, and convincing many people that Yahweh, the God of the Bible, is the true God. Boniface also established monasteries to prepare new converts for future ministry. In addition, Boniface also recruited female missionaries, including his cousin Leoba, who came from her abbey in Wessex, England, together with 30 other nuns. Although these nuns didn't engage in evangelistic activity, they did try to persuade other women in Germany to become nuns. So now I have some discussion questions for you. I want to encourage you to reflect on these questions as we reflect on the history of Christian outreach to the barbarians. So I have 3 discussion questions for you. Number 1, do you think the missionary strategies used to reach the barbarians of Northern and Western Europe during the Dark Ages are useful strategies for missionary outreach today? Why or why not? Number 2, which of the missionaries mentioned in today's lecture do you think is an inspiring example, and why? And question number 3, how do you see God's involvement in reaching the barbarians of Northern and Western Europe with the gospel? So I want to encourage you to think about these questions, and then during our class session, we will discuss these questions together. So I look forward to seeing you in class.